A runner in a race, he practices, trains, eats the right things, keeps a lean, healthy body, wears the best running shoes, and so forth. He gives his best, but loses the race to someone faster. His best was not good enough. Why? It was compared to whether he was faster than his competitors. Johann Blake lost to Usain Bolt in a 100-meter event in 2012 by just a fraction of a second. He did his best, but his best wasn't good enough. A mother and daughter. The daughter is in the second grade of school. She brings home a picture she drew in class. The teacher had put a B- on the picture. The daughter shows it to her mother, and the mother crosses out the B- and puts an A+ on it. She then tapes the picture on the refrigerator. What is the difference between the teacher and the mother? The teacher compares the student to other classmates of her age. The mother grades her according to her best, not in comparison with others. Jehovah does not compare your best with the best of others. Remembering that we are dust, Jehovah never asks more of us than we can give. However, he expects us to obey his commands to the best of our own ability. Mark 12:30. You can likely quote it from memory. Verse 30 says, "You must love Jehovah your God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole mind and with your whole strength." This embraces everything we have, all that we are.
So we're listening to a talk by Samuel Hurd in which he is reminding Jehovah's Witnesses essentially that they can always do more. Their best is almost never going to be good enough. If it feels like it's good enough, then that means you're being self-satisfied and overconfident. But he does remind Jehovah's Witnesses to at least not compare themselves with fellow believers, because at the beginning of the talk, he quoted from Galatians 6 verse 4, which says, "But let each one examine his own actions, and then he will have cause for rejoicing in regard to himself alone, and not in comparison with the other person." At first glance, it seems quite reasonable that Samuel Hurd is at least saying, don't go comparing yourself to another believer. That could lead to any amount of bitterness and ill feeling within a congregation if people are constantly comparing themselves with the brother or sister next to them at the Kingdom Hall. But if you think about it, that's a preferable arrangement or a preferable way of deciding whether you're doing enough to what Samuel Hurd is suggesting when he wheels out Mark 12 verse 30, a verse that haunted me as a child. I could never get my head around this verse. As a young Jehovah's Witness, you must love Jehovah your God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole mind and with your whole strength. Little Lloyd Evans, when I was a kid, I would hear this verse read and I would think, that's impossible. This was years before I would even begin properly doubting my faith. I just knew internally that what this verse was asking of me was impossible, because in my childish mind, I was thinking, well, if I'm going to love anyone with my whole heart, it's my mum and dad. It's my family. And yet here I'm being told that they should play second fiddle because apparently I'm to love Jehovah with my whole heart. I'm supposed to love someone I've never met, someone who is invisible. I'm supposed to love them more than I love my parents, because I have to love Jehovah with my whole heart. Could never, ever get my head around that. But it's not just about loving Jehovah with your whole heart, as the verse goes on. It's about loving Jehovah with your whole soul and with your whole mind and with your whole strength. And predictably, Samuel Hurd is going to elaborate on this verse and remind Jehovah's Witnesses exactly what it means to love Jehovah with their whole soul, whole mind, and whole strength.
You go in service. You use your whole strength to accomplish it. That's commendable. But what good is it to use our whole strength going into the service if our mind cannot direct our tongue to say the right things when we talk to a person? I used a lot of my strength walking from door to door, climbing stairs, and so forth. And yet no one let me get past my introduction. Question: was that the best introduction you could give? How long have you been using that introduction? Would a new one help? Would using your whole mind by means of advanced preparation result in making your best even better? Have you tried to use some of the introductions demonstrated at our midweek meetings, or some of those found in the reasoning from the Scriptures book, pages 9 through 15? What does the householder see in your face when she opens the door? Is your countenance radiating pleasantness and kindness? Does she see good news or bad news? Do you look happy or sad? The message we're commissioned to deliver today is the good news of the kingdom. We expect it to change sometime in the near future. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you can do better.
Thanks for that cute one-liner, Samuel Hurd. When you know better, you can do better. Yeah, I'm sure that took you a while to come up with. B- on that one. Wow. Well, the more I listen to this, and this is the third time I've listened to it now. I did my first watch and then my preparatory watch to single out this segment, and now I've just watched it again just as I'm giving my thoughts. Each and every time I hear this particular part of Samuel Hurd's talk, I think this man is just oozing a patronizing and condescending tone, isn't he? He's essentially sneering at 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses and assuming they're all completely incompetent when it comes to the preaching work, or in some other way letting him down. He says,
but what good is it to use our whole strength going into the service if our mind cannot direct our tongue to say the right things when we talk to a person?
You know how this is going to be received, don't you, by Jehovah's Witnesses? They're going to assume that if they don't say the right thing, this means they're a failure. This means they are failing to live up to the words of Mark 12, verse 30, which sets this impossible standard, as I've discussed. They are failing to love Jehovah with their whole heart, soul, mind, and strength if they go preaching, exerting maximum effort, spending hours and hours walking up and down streets trying to reach people. All of that counts for virtually nothing if they don't say the right things when they're talking to a person. There's just this ever-increasing list of ways in which Jehovah's Witnesses can be failures, isn't there? Even when they're doing their very best, Samuel Hurd's going to think of a way that they're failing. We heard earlier in his talk,
can mundane activity be replaced with theocratic activity?
are you doing things other than theocratic activities in your life? Well, you need to replace those with theocratic activities. How dare you be spending parts of your day doing things that don't benefit me, Samuel Hurd, in some way? There's that unrealistic expectation. And now there's also the impossible standard of you need to always be saying the right things, the things that we approve of when you're preaching, when you're trying to recruit people into the organization that we're leading, when you're trying to recruit new followers of ours. We'd appreciate it if you say the right things. And it's not just about what you say, it's about how you look and indeed what your emotions are. Because Samuel Hurd says,
is your countenance radiating pleasantness and kindness? Does she see good news or bad news? Do you look happy or sad?
if someone looks happy or sad, what are they supposed to do about it, Samuel Hurd? What you're effectively saying here is don't you dare be sad, if you think about it. Unless what he means is if you're feeling sad, look happy anyway. You should be deceiving the householder. If you're having a bad day, and if you're bored, and if you're exhausted, and if you're down, look happy anyway, because we need to trick people into thinking that this is the good news and that it's a great thing to become a Jehovah's Witness. So please make sure that your countenance is radiating pleasantness and kindness, even if you're sad, even if you're unhappy. If he doesn't mean that, then what he means is you don't get to be sad at all. You can only ever be happy. The only way you can be living up to Mark 12, verse 30, and loving Jehovah your God with your whole heart, whole soul, whole mind, and whole strength is if you're always happy. How dare you be sad? That's the alternative to being sad and pretending to be happy. It's just never being sad at all, in which case what we have here is thought crime. Jehovah's Witnesses in that situation would be being policed as to their emotions. And we're straight into the world of George Orwell, aren't we? How dare you be sad? When you're preaching, why would you possibly be sad? You have to be happy all the time. I ask you viewers, could this man be any more unrealistic in the demands he's making of his followers, and any more patronizing and condescending in issuing these demands?
You attend all congregation meetings and pay rapt attention with your mind. You're to be commended. But is that all that's required to love Jehovah with our whole mind? Are we meditating on the knowledge that we receive at our meetings in order to draw close to Jehovah? Do you give comments at meetings? Are they well prepared? Do they encourage your brothers and sisters? Are you giving your best? If so, then your best is good enough. What about your personal study or family worship? Are you doing your best? Is your best good enough? I read all the watchstars and the wakes when they come out, you say. It goes without saying that that's good. What did you find in what you read that will deepen your love and appreciation for Jehovah and draw you closer to Him? Do you use your whole mind to meditate and continue to think about it, thus spiking it down deep into your heart? Some things we learn may not be immediately applicable, but can be regurgitated and applied later as needed.
Well, amen to regurgitated, Samuel Hurd, although that more describes the spiritual food itself rather than the way it ought to be used. But wow, yet more patronizing, condescending nonsense from Samuel Hurd here, making no secret of what his expectations are for ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses. They need to be attending all Kingdom Hall meetings. They need to be paying rapt attention at those meetings. They need to be reading all magazine articles and studying them carefully. But even that, hypothetically, could represent a failure if they're not meditating enough. And this is a word that just gets routinely rolled out by Jehovah's Witness leaders, by Watchtower in its publications and in its propaganda. Meditation. Are you meditating, brother or sister, on what's being said here? What they mean, of course, is, are you, as Samuel Hurd said, regurgitating? Are you just going over the same stuff again and again and again with the assumption that doing that will allow this material to make more sense to you? And having those feelings of self-loathing and guilt if you're not deriving meaning from it, if you're not finding some personal application. Oh, well, that's your fault. It couldn't possibly be that this repetitive nonsense makes no sense. It has to be you. If you're not finding a meaningful application in your life, if you're not able to answer the questions that we ask when we're delivering this material, well, that's on you. That's your fault. It couldn't possibly be that it's just manipulative propaganda and it doesn't necessarily make any sense to begin with. But the whole tone, I just can't get over how condescending and sneering this man is. I can only hope that I'm not the only one here, viewers. I can only hope that when Jehovah's Witnesses are watching this April JW Broadcasting episode, they're going to be thinking, come on, this is the best that the organization has got right now during a pandemic in terms of spiritual food. The best that they have is to just remind us that we should be doing more, and that if we're not ticking all of the boxes that Samuel Hurd would like us to tick in terms of meditating, we're somehow failing in our basic love of Jehovah. We're failing to love Jehovah with our whole heart, mind, and strength.
Are you giving serious attention to the spiritual needs of your wife and children? Yes, you have a family worship most weeks. That's commendable. Do you prepare well for it or just throw something together at the last minute? What if your wife just threw something on the table for dinner each evening without giving any thought to the health needs of the family? Think. Is your best good enough? We can slop a pig and he'll enjoy it, but give the same garbage to a cow and she'll ignore it. Why are we considering is your best good enough? It's only as a reminder to look at what we think to be our best in what we're doing for ourselves, our families, and our spiritual brothers and sisters. And remember, our best is not compared with the best of another brother or sister. Only Jehovah knows when we're doing our best. He is a righteous and fair judge. Our knowledge, even of ourselves, can be faulty due to inherited sin. Therefore, it's wisdom on our part to keep examining ourselves to see where we might improve. So, is your best good enough? I'd like to think it is. What do you think?
Where do we even begin with this madness? We start off with the sexism there. Samuel Hurd talking about the obligation of family heads, of husbands, to do the family study, to make sure the family is being well fed spiritually. And the comparison he gives is of a wife who just slaps food down on the table without thinking carefully about whether it's healthy or nutritious. Apparently, it's just the wife's responsibility to do that. And when she serves the food, she can't just slap it down on the table just because she's maybe having a bad day. She's got to serve the food gracefully, like some kind of waitress. So yes, I mean, this sort of thing comes as no surprise from a man, Samuel Hurd, who is on record as claiming that women have a smaller cranial capacity to men, and therefore they're just not cut out for leadership.
You know, scientists say that the cranial capacity of a woman is 10% smaller than that of a man. So now this shows that she's just not equipped for the role of headship. Her role is one of subjection to the man.
Then we have this bizarre thing about pigs that just comes out of left field. And I've watched it a few times now, and it doesn't get more understandable. And each and every time, I'm just as baffled as to what on earth this means.
We can slop a pig, and he'll enjoy it. But give the same garbage to a cow, and she'll ignore it.
What's the significance of that? Where does that even come from? I've tried Googling it because I just assumed the first time I heard it that this was some well-known saying in some part of America. But when you Google slop a pig, this doesn't come up. So I'm guessing that this is Samuel Hurd's wisdom here. He's probably invented this. And he's imparting this wisdom about slopping pigs and giving the same garbage to a cow. And I guess he's thinking that this is so cool that it will stick and it will become like this well-known expression that will be handed down from generation to generation. And people will say, oh, have you heard the wisdom of Samuel Hurd about slopping pigs? Seriously, I just don't know where that has even come from. And it goes without saying, this is supposed to be spiritual food. And this is the sort of nonsense, this is the sort of garbled rhetoric that just gets smuggled in to these JW Broadcasting episodes. This apparently is spiritual food at the proper time that people need to be hearing. We can slop a pig and he'll enjoy it, but give the same garbage to a cow and she'll ignore it. Well, I think I'll ignore that, quite frankly, because it makes no sense. And I will also ignore, quite frankly, everything that we've heard in this talk, in which Samuel Hurd has just been trying to send Jehovah's Witnesses on one long guilt trip by making them all feel as though they're failing in some way. That's what all of this amounts to. Is your best good enough? How do we know whether your best is good enough? What's our objective standard? How can we reach any kind of satisfaction whatsoever, knowing that we are doing our best as Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, all we've had in answer to that question are mixed messages.
So is your best good enough? I'd like to think it is. What do you think? Only Jehovah knows when we're doing our best. Are you giving your best? If so, then your best is good enough. Our knowledge, even of ourselves, can be faulty due to inherited sin.
This, again, ladies and gentlemen, is spiritual food. It's blatantly self-contradictory. On the one hand, Samuel Hurd is saying, I'd like to think you are giving your best. And if you feel as though you're giving your best, then you are. And then on the other hand, he's saying, of course, only Jehovah really knows whether we're giving our best or not, because he's perfect and we're not. And our knowledge of ourselves could be faulty and unreliable and not something that we can make any firm statements based on. So he's just all over the shop, quite frankly. That whole nonsense about slopping a pig was appropriate, if only to describe this talk that's just all over the place in terms of logic, no clear message, just endless guilt tripping and condescension, and making Jehovah's Witnesses feel inferior and as though they should be doing more, making them feel as though they need to be meditating more, even if they're making it to all the meetings and even if they're reading all the Watchtower magazines, shaming them over whether they look happy, shaming them on whether their countenance is pleasant or not when they're on the ministry. It's not enough to spend hours and hours trying to recruit people to become followers of Samuel Hurd and his pals. You need to be happy. You're not even in control of your emotions as a Jehovah's Witness. It's the good news, so pucker up. You've got to look the part when you're trying to indoctrinate people. And don't you dare think that you get to spend your time doing mundane things as a Jehovah's Witness. Every waking hour must be spent, if possible, if physically possible, must be spent doing things that Samuel Hurd approves of. It's depressing, really, to think that there will be Jehovah's Witnesses taking this seriously and hating themselves because they are inevitably falling short in some way of these impossible standards.